Okay, good afternoon. So we are looking at what is the significance of this fossil study. So we looked at what is this fossil study, what are the different types of fossils or samples are available to study the paleontology, and then we looked at different methods to do it, and then at the end we were looking at the significance of fossil study. So within the significance of fossil study, we had already looked at some of the characteristic in terms of distribution of fossils in successive strata, that is different layers of the earth surface. And then we were looking at the missing links, where we had looked at the first example of Archaeopteryx, which was a kind of link between reptiles and aves, that is the birds. And this was the structure. And we had also looked at what were those specific characteristics. Now, there are quite a few similar species which are non-existent now, or which have been modified completely into some other species. So these are the missing links between certain group of organisms. So the Simoria, this is a group of fossil of ancestral reptiles, and this was studied by this guy called White. And this comes from this Carboniferous period, which is almost 330 millions of years ago. And this organism is a missing link between amphibians and reptiles. So this first image that you see here is it looks like very much something like it's like what we can figure out in today's date is something like a crocodile. All of these organisms, rather, right? Because that whole of the body structure, or like a lizard, a big lizard. So that is like the Samoria, and it is a missing link between amphibians like and the reptiles. Amphibians were those which used to survive on the land as well as water, and from there the reptiles they came after, of course, the first land animal, and this was the Samoria species, and this was one of the fossil that was found quite earlier, studied by this guy. Then there is another species of the missing link which is between fish and amphibia, that is Ichthyostega. So that is Ichthyostega, which is from the Devonian period, or even the Carboniferous period. So in between that, and is the missing link between fish and amphibia. So they had some characteristics like fish and amphibians. So they used to survive. Like if you look at the body structure of the amphibians, they had what we call as the cylindrical long body. That's what reptiles came into picture later. Otherwise they were all fishes which were mostly aquatic, and this Ichthyostega was the first land animal. Means again, that's a prediction from the fossil studies, because in the ancestral evolutionary history, that was found to be one of the oldest animal, again with the help of structure and with the help of dating studies and so on. That is why this is the conclusion of the first land animal. Then there is one of the other missing link called Cynognathus, which is a wolf-sized mammal like reptile, that lived in a Triassic period, which is even earlier time, which resembled reptiles as well as the mammals. So it had characteristics. So if you look at this particular wolf-like structure, which has a body like a reptile, like those lizards, big lizards, I must say, and it had a characteristics of mammals as well. So this is the ancient reptile ancestor of the mammals. Reptile ancestor of the mammals. That means from the point where mammals started, and those mammalian ancestor, which was of the reptile in nature, that is the first of its kind. So that is Cynognathus. And then afterwards, mammals must have evolved from different modification. So again, the kind of question that could be asked in these particular examples will be like type of organism, what does it represent, which is the missing link for, and also maybe the type of period. So you need to remember or kind of mug up these things here. So please make sure that you know these parts. Then there is something called as Basilosaurus, which is a connecting link between aquatic mammals and their terrestrial ancestors. So aquatic mammals, that means the mammals, like a whale is an aquatic mammal, and their terrestrial ancestors, which resembled a whale with hind limbs. So this in structure, it was like similar to the whale, but with the hind limbs. So if you see this tiny portion of this organism, Basilosaurus, that had this tiny hind limb-like structure, which later became extinct with the other species, or even with the whale category. Then the fossil, this was all with respect to the animals. Even with respect to plants, there are few missing links. So there was something called as pteridosperms, which is like kind of junction between pteridophytes, which is a fern like category, and gymnosperm, which is naked seed bearing category of the plants. So this pteridosperm fossil, it was the seed fern that existed in the Carboniferous or Permian period, and forms a connecting link between the fern and the gymnosperm. And their leaves, they resemble those of fern, but the stem showed the secondary growth. Secondary growth was typical characteristic of gymnosperm, which was not the characteristic of the fern. So, like of course, nowadays you will find fern with the secondary characteristics. So this kind of plant, they were earlier called as pteridosperm, and they had seeds like gymnosperm. So if you look at this particular structure, they had a structure like a fern in terms of leaf-like arrangement, but they also had lateral growth or secondary growth. That means a branching from the cambium tissue. So that was called as pteridosperm, which is actually a connection link between fern and gymnosperm, and which is like these are, most of these are non-existent now. So that is the most of the points that we have covered in terms of missing link. So we were looking at first point.
So,
Yes.
Gymnosperms don't show secondary growth in the.
No, gymnosperms, they do show secondary growth. Like for example, let me show you this particular. So
then, but why is it written then seeds like gymnosperms, but secondary growth like ferns?
No, these, where is it? Yeah, here. No, back. So actually, so the seed fern, that means the ferns category, these were reproducing with the help of spore forming ability of the fern, right? So these seed fern, actually I forgot to put the closing bracket here. Yeah, so this is like the seed ferns. It's like that. And
okay, so they were ferns but had seeds.
Yeah, correct. And gymnosperms, they have seeds. Ferns have spores. Gymnosperms, they have secondary growth. Ferns, like earlier time, they had no secondary growth. So, and this is a mixture of both of them. So that is like a connecting link. What was I showing? I forgot. Okay, anyway, so that is the pteridosperm. So going back to this part, so first point in the significance of fossil study was the distribution of fossils in the successive strata. Second one was the missing link, and within missing link we saw several examples. Now the next or the third point in the significance of fossil studies, evolutionary history of the groups. Now, we already know that there are groups of organisms, they have a common ancestors. Like fossil fishes, these are the first vertebrates and the amphibians. Then next they are followed by reptiles and then birds and then mammals. So this is the chronological sequence of this. So the fossil records of different classes of vertebrates that occur in this sequence, right? So, and that is the evolutionary history of whole of this vertebrate category, right? It's a huge group altogether. So we get to know the evolutionary history of the group by the fossil studies. Also, then there are quite a few parameters which we'll see further in terms of anatomy and morphology, which looks quite similar. And then by that, we can also figure out what structure in like ancestor is looking like what structure in the present day animal. So that way, it's easier to study the history of this group. Then evolutionary history of the individual forms. Now in this also, most of the study of the fossil, they have traced out the complete evolutionary history of some animals, like for example horse or elephant or camel or man. That means which was their starting point to what they are now and what are all the different species that have occurred in between. That is the whole evolutionary history of the individual form that we know. For man, most of you already are aware. For horse, I will show you that as an example. So in terms of horse, so if you look here in terms of millions of years, and also in terms of kind of period that they were present at, and the names of the organism. So this was something like a very tiny wolf sized animal used to occur in the grassland. Then it after like this was almost 50, 60 millions of years ago. And if you look at the structure of the limbs, it was like with the phalanges. These like finger like projection, they are called as phalanges. Then from 4, it became 3 in the next animal. So this is Eohippus or this is Mesohippus. So and these most of these they come from the names of the era that they existed as well. This is Merychippus. Now in this, if you see just the first 3, the like kind of phalanges that they have changed over the time of let's say 30 millions of years in between, that the middle like finger or middle phalanges that has grown drastically, and the other 2 they have become shorter, and in the 4th one that you see here, that is completely missing out, right? All the other and the only one of them is present. So that is the structure of this Pilohippus, which is more in terms of size wise, it is smaller, but structure wise, it is more similar to horse. And that way, the current like what we have modern horse, this is the Equus, and this has this typical structure. Also, if you look at this last portion of the phalanges, like you can see, this is kind of accommodating the whole of this upper bone. This was just like a superstructure. This has more like a little flat one. And also, if you look at this representative diagrams, you will see the difference between these 2. So that is how the evolution of horse has occurred from quite a long period of time. And of course, you can also trace out the era before this. But yeah, again, that is just a representative example. If you Google out the evolutionary like hierarchy of the man or camel or elephant, you will find all of them in sequence. But yeah, again, that is not much in the scope of the syllabus, so we'll skip that part. So that was the evolutionary history of individual form, how it has been developed over the time. And you can take any of such example and try and study it. Then the next point in terms of significance of fossil study is the land patterns. So what we know currently, that there are different continents which are separated by a huge portion of the water in between. So from the distribution of the fossils, paleontologists, they had explained the gradual changes in the earth patterns. So all of these continents at one time point, they were together and they drifted apart, and these changes, they are described as continental drifts, or what we call as plate tectonics, right? And this was explained by this Alfred Wegener in 1929. So let me show you that also. So if you look at this particular diagram here, so this is how almost 225 to 250 millions of years ago, this particular like situation existed on the earth. So all of these continents, they were together or almost together, I can say. Then this was called as Pangaea. This whole of the land portion was called as Pangaea, which eventually became into two parts. And you can see this upper part has become separate, the lower part has become separate. So this part portion towards the north was called as Laurasia, and then Gondwana. That these were the two parts. And then later on, like that was again 150 to 180 millions of years ago. Then later, over another 50 million years ago, it became separate territories. And what we see now, they have further drifted apart over the time. And this is how the earth looks like today. So if you compare from this one to this one, there is still a drastic change within 100 millions of years. And if you look at the Indian peninsula, this is attached now to the Asian plate, right, or Asian continent, right? Earlier it was separate almost 100 years ago. Now it is kind of infusion. Also, if you look at the distance between South America and Africa, that has quite a lot drifted apart. Same is the case with North America to Europe. So that is just a representation map, but you can see how it was earlier over almost 200 to 250 millions of years ago, and how it is now. So that is what is explained by this continental drifts or plate tectonics. And this goes back to the fact that the distribution of fossils at different landscapes is different. And if at all you are finding one particular organism in one particular continent and also in the other one, it is most likely that this land was together. Otherwise, these animals wouldn't have been traveled at two different places until and unless they had the ability to cross through the sea route, which is like rare nowadays, like except the amphibian or Pisces category. So that is the last point in terms of significance of study. So there were these 5 different points: distribution of fossils in different strata, missing links, evolutionary history of groups, individual forms, and the land pattern. That all these can be studied with the fossil analysis. Any questions so far in any of these points? Okay, so now so far what we are looking at was the evidences from paleontology, right? That was the study of fossils. Now we will look at the evidences from comparative anatomy as well as the morphology part of it. Now I hope you already know that what is anatomy and morphology for sure, right? So in that aspect, I don't have to explain it again, but knowing the structures or as well as the functions of the organism, that also acted as one of the evidence for the
So,
yeah,
like the previous one and all this, what is this evidence for? Like, what are they trying to prove?
with this continent thing.
No, sir, like the whole thing, all the points that we covered. Like all these points, like what are they trying to prove?
They are trying to prove what does the fossil study leads to ultimately.
Okay, so the importance of fossil study.
Yeah, importance of paleontology in short.
Okay. And this second part that we come to, it's something else, right? The evidences from comparative anatomy and morphology.
So if you remember, I guess I will have to go back a bit. We were looking at the evidences from biological evolution, right? That was the formation of fossils. And then, not this one, I guess I have to go even further. Where is it? Somewhere I had mentioned that. So, like in short, yeah, here it is. So the evidences for biological evolution, that's what we are looking at. How a particular theory of biological evolution is true. That's what we were trying to prove. So we looked at different theories. Then we ended up concluding that there was this theory of abiogenesis happened, that was proven by that Miller and Urey experiment here. That was the part of chemogeny. But later on, it was biological evolution that was happening. That's what life from life that happened. And that's why we were looking at these different evidences for the biological evolution. Now,
But some points are totally unrelated, right? Like land patterns.
no, that was an additional study that we get to study from the fossil study. So that was not proving directly the biological evolution, but of course, when the land pattern developed, it led to the changes in that particular adaptive environment as well. So that is one point it wants to prove there. And
Oh,
it
no, so like the one that where the continents they went apart, and you find the same fossils in two different sides of continents. So you could say they were together. That one, like the diagram that you showed.
no, but that also wants to say in terms of plants. If you like, I'm sure you are aware of that fact that the plants which grow in different continents, they are drastically different due to the temperature and the environmental condition. So that is also a land pattern. It just that doesn't act as a fossil study, but that pattern is being created as a part of evolution. Correct? So that's what it wants to say along with it.
Uh, so like what exactly? I didn't get the last point.
So
You find the same fossils of plants on two different parts. So you can say the environment in those two different parts was the same or similar.
No. What it wants to say is, so there were certain species which existed as a collective land, right? Then, due to the changes in the environment, now the continents they have drifted apart. Situations they were different on different continents, right? So, due to those adaptive environments, those plants they have developed into different species which earlier were a common species.
Okay.
Correct, no?
Yes, sir.
So that's what they want to prove by that land patterns, and that is still a part of evolution. Okay, and also with respect to what I was saying is, so one part we have looked in terms of evidences is just paleontology, that is the study of fossils. Now what we are going to look at is this comparative anatomy and morphology, and then there are these different evidences that we'll look at. We'll not spend much time on the others because these one is the most important, first two are most important, and the rest, and they will look at embryology in little detail, genetics in little detail, and these three or four we will look at very like brief, because they are not so like important in that aspect. Most of the study that we have covered like is already done there. So now we are looking at that morphology and anatomy part of these evidences. So yeah, so the comparative study of the morphology and anatomy of various organs, or even within the like or the organ systems, it says that both similarities as well as differences exist in the structure of the body organs. So there are similarities. Let's say if you take two different organisms, you will find certain similarity, you will find certain differences, and these differences or similarity is due to either similar function or the different function. That is what is whatever ultimately that statement mean is, over the time, though the structurally they look similar or different, it earlier it was a common structure which has developed into something else now, and that is the part of the adaptive environment. So, for example, the presence of this basic structural and functional similarity. Basic structural and functional similarity, that means, let's say if we talk of the vertebrate, having that vertebral column, that is the basic structure, right? and function can be different. Like for example, in apes category, that has a different function to balance more of the body. For a human, it is more to keep the sturdy. For fish, it is to allow them swifter movement through the means to holding the whole structure and allowing them to move forward through the water. So there are these different functional similarities as well as differences. So and that indicates a common ancestry. Having something either in terms of function or in terms of structure indicates the common ancestry. And this is illustrated by different terms. What we currently know as homologous organs, analogous organs. We will see one by one each of these. Adaptive divergence, adaptive convergence, vestigial organs, and atavism. So these are the different terminologies within the comparative anatomy and morphology. So first one, if we look at homologous organs, or what is also called as homology of different organs, that homologous organs are different in appearance, but perform different functions, but they are still on the same basic pattern that have common origin. So that means they have a different appearance altogether. But if you go back to their origin, you will find a common origin. And of course, because they have different appearance, they will also have different functions. We'll see an example of this. And the homology is the similarity in the basic structure of organs of different animals based on a common ancestry. So homology is the similarity of the basic structure. So for example, if we look at the homology of the forelimbs, you will in all these structures, whether you take from human to cat to horse to bat to dolphin, like from fish category to bird category to the human category, you see humerus in all of them, it existed. Radius in all of them, it existed. And go by the color code here. Ulna, you can see it's in yellow color. In every organism, it existed. And also the phalanges, which has existed, and they had different structure altogether, right? But they all have a common origin. That means having a forelimb, that was the common characteristic of these all of these categories of the organisms. So if we go back in this, so this is the similarity in the basic structure. Now in this case, what the example that we had seen is the similarity in the basic structure was similarity of that limb structure, having radius, ulna, femur, and phalanges, and so on. And of the different animals, they were belonging to different animals, but what it indicates is the common ancestry, and that is what is called as homology. And now also, if you think of this second part of the statement, are different in appearances. Obviously, if you look at this hand or the cat, means okay, these two you can probably still put them together. Cat and horse, they might look similar, it just size differences there. But the phalanges, they are different. There is a claw, and there is this phalanges is growing as a big part. In bats, it's totally different. If you look at the wings of the bat, in terms of dolphin, it is completely different in terms of that wing-like structure. Right? So in all of these, though there is a structural similarity, functionally they are drastically different. And though they have all the common structures. So this thing, so these organs, they are called as homologous organs, and that similarity within these organs is called as homology. Then there are another examples in terms of homology in the structure of heart. So again, if you take different categories of animals, from Pisces, that is fish, to amphibians, to reptiles, to the mammals or birds. If you look at the structure of this, it was just two chambered heart, ventricles and atria. And also look at the arrangement of the ventricle and atria. Usually atria is on the top, ventricles is at the bottom, but here it is in the fish, it's other way around. Also, if you look at the amphibia, you can see the right atrium and left atrium, they have separated. So that is the development from two-chambered heart to three-chambered heart. So that is one development. And then there is this sinus venosa, venous, and but again, you need not remember these names. So there is the artery and there are the veins and so on. So that is like a three-chambered heart in the amphibians. In case of reptiles, if you see, this septum has started developing, which was not there in the three-chambered heart. So in the little higher category of these reptiles, it has three-chambered heart. It says except crocodilians, because they have much more similar heart to the mammalian category. But yeah, most of the reptile category that has this, and if you again look at this veins or artery structure, which is more developed, which is more branched compared to the amphibian category. And of course, you know the mammalian heart structure, which is like four-chambered heart. Now this is a representation diagram. It does not literally represent the human heart, but this is how it looks like. So the septum has completely developed. It has two separate compartments for the left and right blood, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. In these cases, in the earlier structures of the heart, the blood was getting mixed. And let's say, for example, in the fish, or even in case of amphibian category, the blood which is like, let's say it goes to the gills and gets oxygenated, it comes back and gets mixed with the deoxygenated blood. So that was the mixture of the blood happening. But in the mammal category, this is totally separate, and the function of this mammalian heart, or even in the bird heart, that is more complex. Still, the bird is relatively little less complex compared to the mammals, but they are similar if you just look at the overall structure of the heart. So that is how the homology of the heart works, and that is also how it shows the development of the or the evolution of the particular organ or organ system. Any question in these two examples so far? We have a few more examples of this, but if you have any question in these two. Okay, so then the next one is homology in the insect mouth part. Now, in general, all of the insects, they had certain structure at their mouth, right? And they had different functions. Now, even though having a mouth, which was like, if you look at their ancestral species, they would have had a very simpler mouth structure. But then it got evolved into different insects with different mouth structure, and that is what is being shown here. For example, it's written here also. For cockroach, it's biting and chewing. That's how the mouth structure developed. For mosquitoes, it's piercing. For butterflies, it's sucking. In houseflies, these are spongy and they are adapted for absorbing food. And again, if you look at the structural aspect, you can see butterfly, the bee, which is more like a sting, tentacle. Beetle, they have more like a claw-like structure. Cicada, or even house flies or grasshopper. So all of them, they have drastically different structure. Though all of them, they have a common ancestor in terms of insect or the earlier insect, which got evolved into different species based on their adaptive environment. So that is another example of homology with respect to the insect mouth part. Then with respect to the homology in plants, so this was again all with respect to the animals. In plants also something similar exists. So if you look at this stem thorn, or the stem tendril, or what is also called as phylloclade and clado. So these thorns in bougainvillea or even in the citrus, these they have certain homology. So bougainvillea or these thorns in general, they were developed as so that they will act as a protective, like they will protect the plant from getting grazed, because obviously there were quite a lot of animals by then, and these animals would have eaten these plants. So to protect this plant themselves over the process of evolution, these thorns were developed in bougainvillea or citrus like plant, or even in case of tendrils. So these thorns that are present in the bougainvillea or even otherwise. Tendrils are these like string-like structures which helps the this what we call vines grow by holding on to some structure. Also, in case of passion flowers, or what is called as passiflora or something. I forgot that name. So that these tendrils, they help in climbing structure, or this phylloclade of the Opunita. So if you look at this structure, uh, this this one is the uh, phylloclade structure, that is the spikes or the thorns on this cactus like plant, or this ruscus. In this case, this spine that is growing out of the leaf, that is in the ruscus plant. And these structures, they are called as phylloclade, because they are, again, their function is to protect. And especially in case of opuntia, this plant, it was developed so that the transpiration will be less, because we all know that cactus, they grow in desert type of landscape where the water is already less, and if the plant is doing more and more transpiration, there will be no water with the plant itself. So to reduce the amount of transpiration, the leaves, they have been converted into this phylloclade like structures. So that is again over the process of whole history of evolution. And safety, yes.
So in cactus, the spine, like the spine and the phylloclade are different.
No, they are the same. It just
So it's labeled differently, right?
Yeah, so it is just like phylloclade. These are small spine-like leaf. That's when I'm saying they are the same.
And what's a spine?
Spine
So,
is,
but if it's like a spine like leaf, it won't do photosynthesis, right?
it's photosynthesis.
So, like before, I heard that in cactus, leaves are modified into spines, which don't do photosynthesis. So the stem does it.
No, actually, I would assume if there is a chlorophyll pigment present, it should do the function of photosynthesis. It should have no other means. So now, if you look,
So the definition is written before, like if you go earlier, like
sorry,
not in the images, in the all section. There was something written. Yeah.
as a leaf. It is not a leaf, it is not a spine completely, it's in between. So like again, you can differentiate. If you look at the original cactus plant, now you will see these spiny phylloclade like structures, which actually looks like a spine only. It just like they are not so pokey and so on.
So what do they mean by a flattened stem? So is it like a stem?
Where are you reading flattened stem?
So there it was written, right? It's like a flattened stem. But we're talking about leaf modifications, right?
Yes.
A flattened branch or a
flattened branch, in the sense, it's like the branch which comes, like in short, it's a bird-like situation. That is what is phylloclade.
Okay. So I had one more question. What's acicular?
Acicular is pointy. So we'll see that. So that is the next. This is the asparagus, right? Again, you might have seen nowadays it's become very famous. Like in any shop you find that. So this cladoed structure, this is like uh, the original leaf has been converted into a spine like. So let me show you the better picture of asparagus. You will easily recognize that. So asparagus, maybe clado. So images, if you look at, yeah, these ones, right? This is something which is called as clado. This is the typical asparagus that you would have seen otherwise. Like this comes in a kind of bunch in a bowl, like, and then they are being sold even in the grocery shop and so on. That is just a kind of showpiece plant. And then uh, yeah, if you look at the difference, you will see acicular is kind of very pointy. You can see the difference here very clearly. This is like a typical leaf, and this is like a clado. Yeah, I hope you are able to see this part. I guess here also it is there. Where is it? Yeah, this something like this. So that is the acicular leaves. Acicular, it means pointy. It's like needle like. That is what means, that is what is the meaning of acicular leaves. So that is the, like, all of these structures. Now again, coming back to that main point. So this homology in plants, though these are drastically different plants now, like from cactus to, this is something like a like pteridophyte of plant. This is something like a regular, I don't know which leaves is this, whether it's a gymnosperm or angiosperm, but even that category is still separate. Cucurbita is surely gymnospermic, sorry, angiospermic. So that way, if you look at all these different category of the plants, they are from different species altogether, but still they have common ancestral origin by looking at the structures that they have, which are modified parts of the plant structure. And these are the basic plant structures which were earlier present. And
Uh,
yeah,
like out of these four things, in the third diagram, the thing that's sticking out, what which is that one?
that's the ruscus.
Okay, so it's the cladwood then.
Yeah, I will also show you. Yeah, uh, ruscus clado, because that will give you, yeah, this is how it will look like. Yeah, of course, there are, I guess, not this maybe. There are different species. Yeah, here is another example. You can see here a spine-like thing is coming up. So there are obviously the different species within that category, but that is like a typical example of it. And these are all is earlier like modified stem. Modified stem in this sense, this is not literally a stem, but like during the period of evolution, the lateral branching has developed into this modified version of this stem. That
So
is when
it's like a vestigial organ.
it's not a vestigial organ, it has a function.
So, but like this cladwood on top of a leaf, it can't do much. I mean, what will it do?
Protection is a function.
But it's so small and thin. I mean, it's not even a proper spine, right?
It is actually. These are very sharp spines. And also the reason why they are being said as modified stem, because if you go back to the development of a plant, we know what is called as axial or cambium growth. That is at the branching point, there is this growth happens. These structures, they are developed from that point. And if you look at here, like for example, this thorn or this tendril, they are developing from those points only, what we simply call them as branching point. So that is how these structures, they are developed or evolved over the time, and that is why they are all modified stems.
So, what's the function of the phalloclade? So, the tendril is for climbing. The uh, cladwood is for like as for protection. So, what does the phalloclade do?
I guess the function of phylloplade is again protection as well as the photosynthesis. There shouldn't be any difference with that aspect.
Okay.
So that was the homology and the different examples of those homology. Now there are different types in terms of what we call as like what is the origin of that homology. That way there are different types. There is phylogenetic homology. Phylogeny, it always refers to the hierarchical characterization or categorization of different organisms. So that is phylogeny in the process of evolution. So the similarity among the animals or among the plants of different species, that will be called as phylogenetic homology. For example, the hand of a man and a forelimb of a horse, and or even a bat. These are drastically different, but they have similarity in terms of the internal structure, that is humerus, radius, ulna, and phalanges, and so on. So that way they become an example of phylogenetic homology, because first, like obviously bat would have developed in terms of evolutionary history, then horses, or maybe simultaneously into horses and the separate category of the man. So that is how the evolution or the phylogeny would have occurred there. That is still an example of phylogenetic homology. Sexual homology, parallelism between the male and female reproductive organs of the same species. Like again, in case of human, male and female, like testis and ovary, in terms of function, they do production of gamete and they do secretion of sex hormones. So that way, there is certain parallel ground that is being established. So that is sexual homology. Then serial homology, the homology in different organs of an individual as seen in the walking legs in an insect or segmentally arranged appendages of the prawn. Now prawn, they have certain appendages, as well as insects, they have certain appendages. Like these are different organs altogether, but there is certain similarity, and that is called as serial homology, and they are not necessarily evolutionarily closer. Otherwise they would have fallen into phylogenetic homology. Then molecular homology, again, we know for sure DNA is the genetic material found in all the organisms. So there is obviously certain similarity, that is in terms of presence of DNA. So that becomes the base for molecular homology. So these are the 4 different types of the homology, and based on the presence of these homologous organs, it confirms that like different types of homologous organs or organ system, there is a common ancestry and the interrelationship of the different groups. So like again, that part to human kind of example, that is a perfect example of this evolution, saying that there is a common ancestry, as well as the occurrence of the divergent evolution. We'll see this part. So divergent refers to common ancestor developing into 2 organisms. Those 2 organisms further developing, may not necessarily 2, it can be a single organism or 2 or more organisms, and then they are further evolving as per their environment. So that is like a divergent evolution. So from a common ancestor developing into several other species, or that is also called as descent with modification, which we had seen earlier. So that is what is established by this whole of this homology or homologous organs part. Any questions so far? Okay, so actually we will stop here. We are already on the verge of ending with the time for the class. Next class we will look at that analogous organ and the analogy. This is another good example. There are several other examples in terms of analogy. So I'll just go back here. So we looked at these homologous organs. We look at the analogous organs. Again, that's the main part. And then these other 4: adaptive divergence, adaptive convergence, vestigial organ. This will be another interesting part in this, like appendix being one of them in the human body, and this atavism. These we will study in the next class.